Well, good morning, Wellspring family and friends, and Happy New Year to each one of you. It's good to see your faces, and I have to say the new year came up really quickly for me. So much so that I was sending an email this week, and I mentioned something like, oh, let's follow up on this in 2026. And then I realized that it was 2026. I was like, in my mind, it's still like 2 weeks away. My head is still in last year. So thankfully, we're in the Christmas story still a little bit longer. We're not jumping to a new story yet, or even right away to Wellspring's Word of the Year, which is something Wellspring does every year. Your leaders seek God and listen and hear a word for the year that we that can kind of guide our focus and our attention during the year. And we're going to be doing that in a couple of weeks. There's no need to rush. But for this week and next, we're going to continue looking at the Christmas story in Matthew chapter 2. And I do encourage you to read it this week. And because it is a longer passage, I want to invite 4 readers up here to read it for us today. So can you give them some encouragement? So our 4 readers, come on up. Come on up. You can follow along in your bulletin.
Trying to get in numerical order here. It's like the minions trying to do. Okay.
You guys can come closer. Oh, bye. Huh? Oh, yes. Oh, it's not.
All right. Okay. And this is the reading. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem, asking,
Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observe his star in the east and have come to pay him homage.
When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him,
In Bethlehem of Judea, for it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judea, are by no means last among the rulers of Judea, for from you shall come a ruler, who is to shepherd my people, O Israel.
Then Herod secretly called for the Magi and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying,
Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word so that I may also go and pay him homage.
When they heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen in the east, until it stopped over the place where the child was.
When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid homage. Then, opening their treasure chest, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road.
Now after they had left, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said,
Get up, take the child and his mother, and flee to Egypt, and remain there until I tell you, for Herod is about to search for the child to destroy him.
Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother by night, and went to Egypt and remained there until the death of Herod. This was to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet.
Out of Egypt I have called my son.
When Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he was infuriated, and he sent and killed all the children in and around Bethlehem, who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had learned from the Magi. Then what had been spoken through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled.
A voice was heard in Ramah, wailing and loud lamentations, Rachel weeping for her children. She refused to be consoled because they are no more.
When Herod died, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared in a dream to Joseph in Egypt and said,
Get up, take the child and his mother, and go to the land of Israel, for those who were seeking the child's life are dead.
Then Joseph got up, took the child and his mother, and went to the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus was ruling Judea in place of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. And after being warned in a dream, he went away to the district of Galilee. There he made his home in a town called Nazareth, so that what had been spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled.
He will be called a Nazarene.
Thank you, readers. Oh my goodness, and what a story this is that we're looking at today. What a passage. Good thing we have 2 weeks in it. We're going to be looking at slightly different parts of it, aspects of it each week. Now, this summer, as many of you know, I was able to receive the gift of a sabbatical. Got to spend a portion of it in Italy, where my family is from, along with Dan and our children. And as we were visiting with family, we were able to share some meals together, and we found out that a town nearby, the town of Pisa, was having an annual celebration, the Luminata di San Ranieri, which means the lights of Saint Rainieris. And they celebrate every single year their patron saint, a man who had been a wealthy musician and lived kind of a wild partying life, and had an encounter with Jesus and completely changed his priorities and what he chose to do. And he wound up living in poverty alongside the poor, lived a life of preaching and of miracles, and was very beloved by his town. And hundreds of years later, the town still celebrates him by lighting over 100,000 wax candles. They light this every year. It takes them hours to light them. Here's along a bridge. And you can start to see along the facades of the buildings, they have these like little wooden frameworks that they place the candles into. And you stay there. We found a place by the river, and you see, right, we're kind of on the bank of the river there. And we just sat there, and we were kind of on the river was swirling around us, so you could kind of see from horizon to horizon. As far as the eye could see, you could see these lights. And as the sun went down, they began to glow. They turn all the electric lights off. So it takes hours. And you're there in this night full of magic and beauty. The whole town comes out, and people from around Italy come. They actually extend all their buses and trains to the wee hours of the morning so people from Florence and other cities can come. And all the students come out. It's a college town. It's just wonderful. And the fireworks went off at 11, and afterwards, everyone's having the best time, and we go to make our way back to where we're staying, and it's very crowded in the streets. The road is very crowded, and, we make sure that we're staying together. We kind of give some instructions in case we get separated. And everything seems to be okay. We're moving with the flow of foot traffic. There's no cars. Everything's been blocked off. When we began making our way across a bridge that we had easily walked over in maybe 3 minutes on our way to where we were sitting at the beginning of the night. And after about a couple minutes, we realized that we were stuck because we couldn't go forward. And we were being increasingly pushed by a wave of people that was coming behind us to cross the bridge. So we're getting compressed with a wave of people trying to cross the bridge on one side and a wave of people coming to cross on the other. And there we were in the middle, and I lost track of our oldest son. And as the minutes went by with a lot of jostling, I was pushed away from our youngest, who I told to hang on to his dad as tight as he could. And by that point in time, my heart rate was through the roof. I've read too many news stories like this, tragic tales. And because we were outside, I guess I hadn't really thought of it, but there we were trapped on a bridge. It's pitch black. You can't see anything. And after about 10 minutes of this and getting increasingly jostled, I begin to hear people crying around me. I'm like, am I crying too? The surge of energy is surging through me, of adrenaline from fear. And then I realized, no, I'm not crying. But apparently, I got in touch with my Pentecostal roots, and I was speaking in tongues about as loudly as I could, loud enough to raise poor Saint Rainierus. And in a few minutes, I was able to breathe more deeply and be able to decide what to do next. But it was a wonderful dream of a night that began turning into kind of what felt like a nightmare. And I know that in the stories of your lives too, you have moments where fear suddenly breaks in. It might actually be like a long-standing fear, something you've lived with for a while that's just kind of low-grade fear, or might be a sudden shock, like when you're on the freeway and you realize, I'm about to get in an accident, or that person's about to get in an accident. Or it might be a sudden email you receive, maybe if you're a student in school and it's from the office and you're wondering what's going on, or you're a worker and it's from HR and you think, what's going to happen to me? Maybe it's the longer-standing fear that comes from walking alongside someone you love who is very sick. Or maybe watching a relationship sort of disintegrate and you're not really sure why, but you know that you are worried and afraid about it. Fear in all of its forms is something I think we're probably pretty familiar with as frail humans who are vulnerable in different ways. And our story for today that our 4 readers read, thank you so much, set in the light and joy of the Christmas story, right? It doesn't stay just in the light and joy and wonder of the Christmas story, but suddenly we see the presence of fear. The arrival of the Magi in Jerusalem sets the tone for the chapter. They come to worship the newborn King of the Jews, but they don't bring wonder, joy, or excitement with them. Their arrival doesn't bring this up in people, but rather the text tells us that when King Herod heard why they were there, he was, this is the word tarasso, greatly disturbed, deeply frightened, and all Israel, all Jerusalem with him. They were filled with dread, horror, fear. It was this deep gut feeling. And why? Is it because the Magi were really scary people? No. I mean, the Magi, these are some foreign dignitaries. The word Magi, we get that from the ancient Persian word magus, which was an ancient class of priests associated with the Zoroastrian religion. They were really renowned for their astronomy, their wisdom, their astrology, their healing. And the Jewish prophet Daniel, who was in Persia, who was in Babylon as an exile, he would have rubbed shoulders with many of these people, many folks that were Magi or magus. And it's possible that some of the writings he left behind or some of the things he said are actually what fueled their own search for a Jewish Messiah, for a newborn king, that led them to look up at the stars and see something new, God announcing that God was doing a new thing. So King Herod and all Jerusalem, they're not terrified because the Magi are scary people, but rather they're terrified at their message. They are disturbed and afraid because of the news the Magi bring. They are looking for a newborn King of the Jews, the Messiah, the chosen one. Now, they already had a King of the Jews. They had King Herod. King Herod was a champion. Many of them saw them as a champion for them. He had brought some stability to the region after so many blood-soaked years. He commanded his own army, had the power to make his own commands and edicts. He had rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem from, it had been, razed to the ground, just absolutely destroyed, and he rebuilt it and made it beautiful and just fantastic. And they really, many of them, saw him as their king, the one who had brought them much of what they had hoped for. But a newborn king could challenge and change all of that. So as the Magi made their way down the road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem, all of Jerusalem was afraid. And we see in Bethlehem, we see an angel appearing. Rico, fantastic voice for the angel there. I'm like, say more. I love how you said, how you used the angel's words there, get up. Because that's what the angel said. Here, Joseph's having a dream. The baby's been born. They're safe in Nazareth. And when the angel appears, the angel does not bring the customary greeting of, be not afraid, right? All the angels bring that all the time. I think because angels do look a little scary. I think they must. All the angels say, do not fear. I bring you good news. But not this time. It's get up, take the child and go. Joseph would need that fear as fuel. He would need that to be able, that rush of adrenaline to gather Mary and the child and the supplies they needed and get out that night. He would need that as a refugee on the road to Egypt, hiding whenever soldiers came by, doing what he could to keep them safe. Fear was needed that night as fuel for the road ahead. Now, those who study the body tell us that there are certain physiological changes in our actual bodies that take place when we feel afraid. Your adrenal glands, and I had to read all this and look it up because I don't know this off the top of my head, so I might actually read it. Here we go. You ready? Your adrenal glands flood your system with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart pumps faster to get more blood to your muscles in case you need it. Your blood pressure probably goes up and your breathing speeds up to increase your oxygen intake. It's basically it's getting your body ready for whatever perceived threat it is facing. Now, each person reacts differently, has like different behavioral responses to this bodily reaction, right? This is a reaction your body just does. And you may have heard of these before, right? There's fight or flight, right? These are very common reactions. There's freeze, which is another one where your body actually doesn't really do much of anything. You're kind of stuck there. And then there's fawn. This is a newer one that some people have identified, which is sort of extreme people pleasing to appease a perceived threat. And this is all sort of the reaction that your body kind of does on its own. It does to keep you alive, whether or not you're actually in a life-threatening situation or not, right? We don't have a lot to say about our biological, physiological response to fear. But once the initial surge of adrenaline subsides, more opportunities do arise for you and I to have a response to our fear, for us to kind of choose how we're going to be in that moment, for us to decide what to do. As a young adult, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl knew what it was like to be afraid. And he wrote this in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. He said, everything can be taken but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way forward. Now, Viktor Frankl there, he's talking about the space between the stimulus and the response, the space between, right, when you're flooded with fear and then how you choose to respond. And in that space, there's opportunity for us. There's opportunity for growth. There's opportunity for freedom, he believes. Now, for me, on that night in Pisa, it felt life-threatening, whether or not it was. And I don't know whether this was because speaking in tongues helped to ground me, apparently. But after about 20 minutes had passed, I realized a couple things. I had some mental clarity. One was that I wasn't going anywhere, but I was probably going to faint. That was it. I could feel myself being compressed, and I'd remembered all the things I read about, trying to keep your diaphragm, space for your diaphragm so you're not compressed in a crowd, but it wasn't working. And I couldn't move forward or back, but I found I could move sideways. So that's what I began doing. I began moving sideways in the crowd all the way till I got to the edge of the bridge. And at the edge of the bridge, remember it's pitch black, you can't see anything, I discovered that there was an emergency lane that the police had set up, and there were a whole bunch of Italian police. I also realized that there was a woman and 2 children that were following me as I wedged my way over to the side. They were right going in my wake. They were smaller than I was. Now, I'm not sure if it was like my very poor Italian and how I tried to use it, or whether it was just that I looked so terrified and the woman with me looked so terrified. I don't know. But the Italian police actually, I convinced them to open up the whole blocked emergency lane in the bridge. And then, of course, I walked down it as quickly as I could while they were opening it behind me. I was like, I'm going to be the first out of here with this lady and her kids. And then after I got off the bridge safely, I made sure my family was okay on WhatsApp. I actually found more police and tried to advocate to have them sort of limit the flood of people who were headed in. And I was less successful at that. Apparently, when I'm afraid, I get very bossy. That's not a surprise, is it? Oh, many of you know that about me. So I wasn't successful at getting them to limit the flow of traffic, but we did open up the emergency lane. And that brings me to number 1 in your notes, and that's this. On the fear-fueled road, we don't get to choose our reactions, right, what our body does, but we can choose our responses. Right after that initial surge of fear and cortisol and adrenaline, we can choose how we will respond. In our story for today, I don't know how Joseph reacted to the news of the angel Enrico's voice, "Get up." I don't know whether he sprang up in a surge of fear and grabbed Marian's supplies. I don't know if he awoke silently in bed and took a couple minutes to chart in his mind what he was going to grab first. I don't know. We don't know the reaction he had to fear, but we do know his response. His response was to believe the words of the angel. His response was to move to protection of the vulnerable, get Mary and the child, get them to safety. Fueled by his fear and by love, he made the difficult path of a refugee and journeyed to some place that would be safer. Fleeing that very night, they didn't wait, that very night to Egypt, where they lived as refugees for years. Now, Herod, on the other hand, you remember, he was afraid too. He was the one who's so greatly disturbed, filled with distress and fear. He chose to respond with lies and a push to control amidst sort of a veneer of nicety, right? He says in verse 7, he's like, to the Magi, he's like, "Go and search carefully for the child. And as soon as you find him, report to me so I can worship him too." Right? He looks like he's being so religious. Oh my goodness, King Herod wants to go and worship him too. But that wasn't his heart. We see his heart a couple verses later when he realized he had been outwitted and when he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem, 2 years old and under. The thing is, he had the lawful ability to do this. He gave the command to kill them, and these perceived threats to power. It was a lawful edict. He had the power to do so, and those who followed it were following a command, following the law. But even though it was lawful, it was a perversion of law and order, which is meant to protect and uplift the vulnerable. He perverted law in order to carry out something cruel and unimaginably wrong, an anti-Christ act. The story invites us to pay attention to what people in power do when they feel like they've been threatened. Pay attention to how and what kind of choices people in power make when they are afraid. What do they do? What do they justify? Because this tells us who they are and what our response to them might be, even as the Magi refused to obey the order of King Herod to go back and tell him where the Christ child was. See, on the fear-filled road, we can't choose our reactions, but we can choose our responses. My invitation to you today as we begin this new year is, what are some responses that fear might provoke in you? Over the last, I don't even know how many years, probably as long as I've been alive, I've noticed that Christians in the West, and I can especially see this coming from the Philippines as a missionary kid, as a young adult to the US, I could see that it seemed like many churches were very, very afraid of the decline of the influence of Christianity. They were afraid of the loss of their values. They felt under attack, were afraid for persecution. And sometimes when we are fearful, we can move in ways that actually look less and less like Christ. whether it be hoarding resources or even weapons, or demonizing people who look or act or think differently than us. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm afraid, I consume content that actually makes me even more afraid. Why is that? Does it make me feel better? It does not. But sometimes we can do that more and more to the point that our neighbor begins to look like an enemy. This is not the way of Christ. This is not the kind of king, the newborn king of the Jews, Jesus is. There's this book by the name Jesus and the Disinherited, and it was published in 1949, and it became sort of like an inspiration for the civil rights movement, the nonviolent civil rights movement in the 60s and 70s. It was written by ordained Baptist minister and mystic Howard Thurman. And in this book, he invites those reading to hold their responses to fear alongside love. Fear, he writes, tells us to protect ourselves, and love asks who we are willing to risk ourselves for. When it hardens us, fear can cause us to betray actually some of our deepest held values. But when held with love, fear can awaken courage. It's what we see in Joseph. Love and fear together. Courage. So the question of our lives, friends, isn't whether or not the fears that we'll face in this year, whether they'll shape us or not, because yes, we will be shaped by our fears. The question is, what will we do when those fears come along and space emerges for our response? What will you and I choose to do once the initial reaction to what we're afraid of, maybe it's the news of the day or the week subsides and you have inner space to respond? Will it move you towards people or away from them? Towards our God who cares for you and for the vulnerable, or away from God? And if one day we wake up and we realize we've chosen poorly, will we be able to receive God's compassion and forgiveness to try again? Have courage. On the fear-fueled road, we can't choose our reactions, but we can choose our responses. Number 2 in your notes, on the fear-fueled road, look for unexpected guides and compassionate witnesses. Look for unexpected guides and compassionate witnesses. Now, if you and I had the time today to do a full Bible study on Matthew chapter 2, some of the things I'd invite you to look for are all the unexpected guides, the witness and presence of those we might not anticipate to be in the story. And you know what? Because this is the first official Sunday of the year, why not? If you want to grab your worship notes and take out the narrative, any unexpected guides or compassionate witnesses that you just want to yell out. And our friends online, feel free to write it in the chat section. Who do you see in this passage? It doesn't have to be in order, and it's not a test. Sorry, I should have given you notice earlier. Go to that really long story. Are there any unexpected guides that you see here on this fear-fueled road of Matthew chapter 2? No, there's one in the sky. The star! Yes, the star is one. Who would expect a star to be a guide? I love how at the end of the chapter, it's like, or in the middle of the chapter, it's even like moving to the place, like directing them to the place where they should be. Okay, yes, we have the star. I think verses 2, 7, 9, and 10. What else do we have? What do you see? We have the Magi, yes. Yes, these are outsiders, right? These aren't priests of God in Jerusalem. These are priests from Persia, but they're seeking God's presence and direction, right? These are powerful individuals who are responding with generosity to the move of God. So kind of unlikely guides, unexpected witness. What else do we see? Who else do we see? Maybe think of Rico's voice. Angels, yes, we have dreams and angels. Look at how many instances of this. Verse 12, 13, 19, and 20, 22. We have this guidance from above, these guidance in dreams and in angels, and it's not the kind of guidance that provokes certainty in you. I'm not sure there's anyone who's ever experienced a dream where an angel spoke to them and they were like 100% certain. Normally it requires some kind of trust, like, I'm going to choose to lean into this. I'm going to choose to believe this. And then we also have something else in Rico's voice, and that's the voices of the prophets. We have the voices of the prophets here, lending their aid, speaking from the past, wisdom that's being brought forward into the current moment. And friends, in your life and in my life, right, in the fear-fueled roads of our day, there are still unexpected witnesses and guides. We are not left without resources. We have the voices of the prophets, as Jesus did. We have all creation around us that God can speak through. We have dreams and God's angels at work, whether they be supernatural angels, whether it be angels among us, like trusted mentors and maybe therapists or elders. We also have the unexpected witness here of Rachel's tears. We're going to go back to that in just a minute. I have to say, when I was looking at the text for today, as a parent who suffered through the loss, the death of their child, I think the hardest part of this passage for me to go through and read is what Herod does to the children of Bethlehem. And not because I want to read it again, but because it brings us into Rachel's tears. So here we go on this fear-fueled road. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, and that is the wrong text there. We are actually in Matthew chapter 2, verses 16. When Herod realized he had been outwitted by the Magi, he was furious. And he gave orders to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and younger, in accordance with the time he had learned from the Magi. Then what was said through the prophet Jeremiah was fulfilled. This is in Jeremiah 31. A voice is heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because they are no more. Now, if you're like me, you might wonder, why is this passage being quoted here? And for many years, I thought, it was because, someone needed to fulfill a scripture of this woman weeping and crying. So that's why this was done. And it took me many years to discover that's actually not at all what is happening. And that is not why Matthew is lifting up this witness of Rachel for them now. You see, in Jeremiah 31, Rachel is a witness to something very difficult that the Israel people have gone through. And that was their displacement, the burning of Jerusalem, and the displacement of the remaining people who are left to be forced to go to Babylon as exiles. So when Jeremiah is referring to Rachel, he's referring to her as witness to the exiles. And then if you and I were submerged in Jewish religion and culture, we would know why he's lifting up Rachel as a witness. And it's because Rachel, if I can remind you who she is in the Bible, she is the wife of Jacob, beloved wife of Jacob, later renamed as Israel. She's one of the matriarchs of the Jewish faith. And she died in childbirth and was buried not in the family tomb, not in the wonderful, gorgeous tomb with all the other patriarchs and matriarchs, not in the prestigious tomb, but rather she was buried on the road to Bethlehem. She was buried along the fear-fueled road. This is the same road that many years after her death, yes, the exiles passed, going to Babylon, and the exiles passed, returning home. And Jewish commentary on this states that Jacob knew that the exiles from Jerusalem would pass that way. Therefore, he buried her there so she might pray for mercy for them. So Jewish thought says. They even have Jacob talking to his son, Joseph, and saying, and Joseph's like, Dad, or one of his sons, it was Joseph or Benjamin, like, why didn't you bury her in the family tomb? And they have Jacob saying in response, God told me to do this so she would be of help to her children. So in Jewish tradition, Rachel is a witness. Rachel is a grieving mother saying, what is being done to my children? Children, what are you doing to each other? She is interceding along the way, along the road, and weeping. So it might sound, right, if you zoom out and just look at Matthew's chapter 2, it sounds like he's just sort of recounting the facts, but there's so much emotion in his account as he joins the witness of their mother, Rachel, their matriarch, to the voices of those in his day who were grieving the loss of their children from the despot King Herod. In our day as well, I believe we can lift up the witness of Rachel, lift up the witness of others who still grieve the loss of the innocent, who still intercede for all of God's children, those who join in Rachel's tears along the road. Friends, on our fear-fueled road, we are not left alone. There are unexpected guides. There are compassionate witnesses. And in our own day, on the road where fear travels, we know that fear can still corrupt law and order. We know that fear can still be met with worship, as it was for the Magi. We know fear can still produce refugees. Fear can still be witnessed with tears. Unexpected guides, ancient wisdom can be found on the road. And friends, on the road where fear travels, there is also God. On the fear-fueled road, there is Jesus. Jesus is no stranger to fear. He must have felt it that night. The night when his dad woke them up in a hurry, and they had to take just a few things, maybe even not his favorite carved donkey. Who knows? I hope he was able to grab his blankie. We don't know. He must have felt afraid as they hurried out in the middle of the night and hid whenever they saw soldiers. Jesus was a child when they fled as refugees and were displaced, and he was a child when they returned and found that the land was still not perfectly safe, and they had to move around for a bit before they were able to find a place in Nazareth, a place known for producing nothing impressive. Jesus knows what it's like to be on the fear-fueled road. Jesus knows what it is to be displaced and vulnerable and dependent, because Jesus became a refugee for the refugees. He's exiled for all the exiles, metaphorically and literally. If we were to zoom out from this story in Matthew chapter 2 and we were to look at the entire book of Matthew, the larger story of Matthew, remember, each gospel writer has their own sort of theological lens as they write. Each one emphasizes different things, which is why when you want to compare something in one book, it's good to compare it with the rest of the book to say, how does this work with what this author is putting forward, this vision they're putting forward? If we were to zoom out from this story, we would know that Matthew begins and ends his book naming Jesus as king. Here in chapter 2, he's called the newborn king of the Jews. He's barely been born, and we're already naming him as king. And in chapter 27, as Jesus hangs on the cross, the charge above his head reads, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." And in case you're wondering, well, what kind of king is Jesus? Matthew doesn't leave you hanging. All throughout the book, he paints a picture of what kind of king is Jesus. He gives us Jesus' mission statement, drawing from the prophet Isaiah, and this is from perspective of God the Father. He says, "Here's my beloved servant whom I've chosen. I will put my spirit on him, and he will proclaim justice to the nations. He will not quarrel or cry out. A bruised reed he will not break. A smoldering wick he will not snuff out." This is the kind of king, the beloved servant, that Matthew puts forward, saying this is who God is. This is who God's chosen son is like. What kind of king will he be? One who proclaims justice to the peoples of the earth. Friends, notice how justice comes out. Justice arrives not as a militarized justice, formed by domination or violence, where he's not going to be crying, "Attack!" in the streets, right? It's a justice that protects what is already wounded. A bruised reed he will not break. Something that's already halfway broken, he's not going to say, "That's useless, let's throw it out." But he cares for the wounded and vulnerable. A smoldering wick, imagine a little candlelight ready to go out. He doesn't snuff it out, but rather in gentleness fans into flame the hope and goodness that is there. In him, the gentle king, We see the vision of God's shaped justice through everything in the book of Matthew, right? A couple chapters later in the book, in chapter 5, we have the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount is the ones where we see who are the least expected. They're the ones who are citizens of heaven. They're the ones who are blessed. It's the meek, not the powerful, the poor in spirit, not the proud, the merciful, not the deal makers, those who hunger and thirst for justice, not those who are pushing for the status quo. So if you read the book of Matthew with a bird's eye lens, you can see this kind of an upside down kingdom led by an altogether different kind of king, right? Jesus lives a life identifying with the outsider in every way. And then later in Matthew's gospel, right before he goes to the cross, Jesus gives one of his clearest and I would say maybe hardest teachings. And it's about a king who returns. And all the peoples of the world are gathered. And the king separates them as though a shepherd would be separating maybe their herd, maybe sheep from goats. To those on his right, the king says, I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a xenos, a foreign immigrant. That's where we get our word xenophobia from. If you're afraid of outsiders, afraid of strangers, afraid of immigrants. I was a xenos, and you invited me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And they respond in surprise, Lord, when did we see you like that? And then Jesus answers, whatever you did for the least of these siblings of mine, you did for me. And then Jesus names the other side, those on the other side. When did we not feed you? When did we not clothe you? And Jesus says, whatever you did not do for the least of these, this is verse 45, you did not do for me. And here Jesus as King takes caring for those in need seriously, identifying God's own self with specific groups of people, those who are hungry and thirsty, those who are imprisoned and displaced, the xenos, the migrant stranger, the forgotten, those sick. Jesus takes caring for those in need seriously. We know at the same time that God is not a brittle or a harsh king. Right? He won't break what is wounded or snuff out hope that's barely there. So today, perhaps you might be one in need yourself. You might feel wounded and exhausted and close to losing hope. Know that God's word is not here to guilt you or crush you, but your gentle King is here to heal you and bring you hope on the fear-fueled road. Perhaps you are here and you have some margin. Actually, things are going really well. You're excited about this new year. You have more than enough. Then I remind you to see who is near you, who Jesus might be hiding among. Someone who is hungry and thirsty, a displaced person, someone in prison or in hospital. Friends, on the fear-filled roads of our lives, Jesus, child of the road, is with us, gentle bearer of justice. As we get ready to take communion in a minute, I want to invite you, as we enter this new year ahead, I know that each one of us are going to encounter situations where we will be shaped by fear, right? The question isn't whether fear will shape us, but we will. And after the initial reactions, how will we choose to respond? I invite you to be like Joseph and to hold fear and love together. As we get ready to take communion together and proclaim Jesus' death until his resurrection, proclaim his way and his kingdom, his saving power that always goes, Matthew says, to seek and save the lost, I want to invite you into a gentle self-assessment. What kind of king are you following? What kind of king am I following? Your king might be my way, the way that you want to live. It might be an actual leader who inspires your confidence. It might be a value you really hold on to, or maybe a group you've identified with in the past. If you're not sure what kind of king you've been following, you can ask, well, what are the voices I'm listening to? What do sort of things are they saying? Right? Because every king has a prophet. What are the voices around this king saying? Do they call to eliminate threats? Do they demonize people who are different? Do they really care about conquering? Or the prophets around this king, do they sound more like Rachel, weeping and witnessing, refusing to look away from the wounds, crying out for restoration, prayerful? What voices are we listening to? And maybe you're here, or maybe you're listening online, and you're like, you know what? The question of what kind of king I'm following is just way too abstract, and it does not resonate at all. And if that's you, that's totally okay too. Maybe instead you can ask yourself, what do I want to let guide my decision making this year when I'm afraid? Who are the people and voices I want to listen to? What about Jesus and Jesus' way and Jesus' life is inviting me in? And maybe today as you listen, you don't have time for any of that because you just don't have any mental space. You're just exhausted. You're still in the thick of fear. You don't know what to do. Maybe you feel a bit lost. The good news is Jesus says the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost. Jesus is here looking for you on the road. You can be found. You can be cared for. You can be forgiven. You can be saved. You can be restored. You can be healed. Lord, as we come to the communion table where you give of your very life for us, will you open our hearts and open the wisdom and discernment of our minds that we could see you in all of your disguises around us. We could see you on the road with us in the ways that we need to meet with you. We can see those helpful guides and witnesses. We can have the presence of those who weep. And open our eyes, most importantly, to see Jesus on the road with us, making a way, making space for the outsider, reconciling and healing, fully identifying with painful humanity in all the ways we are broken, so that you could bring your healing power, God's healing power, to each of us. So may your healing power now flow. Amen.